Okay, welcome everybody to our agenda workshop. We're really delighted to share our resource with you all this afternoon. It's a resource that we hope will give you practical tools and ideas which you can draw upon and adapt, either specifically for your RSE curriculum or more widely in terms of supporting children and young people's health and well-being. So my name is Professor EJ Renold, and I'm going to begin first by introducing the aims of our taster session today and what we're going to cover over the next 2 hours, so you can dip in and out if you want to, and then I'll introduce you to the wider team. So as our programme sets out, it might set out if I manage to work out how to change the screen. Okay. There we go. As our programme sets out, we've designed the session into 2 parts. So the first part is going to introduce you to the agenda resource, which is something you can download for free as an interactive PDF. You can read it online, but it's also something you can navigate through a website because we've made the whole resource web friendly. And during this introduction, we're also going to share 2 films which bring the resource to life. And then we have a Q&A session where you can ask teachers anything you like about how they've been adapting or how they're planning to adapt the agenda resource in their own practice. The second part of the session then will introduce you to the activities we've developed more specifically for teachers during the COVID-19 pandemic, and Kate will introduce you to those. So by the end of the session then, we hope you'll leave with a little bit of inspiration on what might be possible when we get creative with making safe and inclusive spaces to listen and learn from children and young people about what matters to them, and then how we as practitioners can support them. And just to reiterate an email you'll have received from the NEU, there's a Google Drive link which holds the PowerPoints and script we're drawing upon this morning. I think Kate's posting the link there now. And the Google Drive also will contain the PDF of the entire agenda resource and the agenda COVID activities. So in addition to myself, our wider team today includes the wonderful Kate Marston. She's our agenda researcher and practitioner who co-designed the COVID agenda activities. And we also have 3 of our teacher agenda ambassadors today. Kowsar unfortunately can't make it today, and she's unwell, but we have Maureen Begg, Alex Hewitt, who'll be joining us a bit later, Mark, who's here, Mark Lewis, and then we have Esther McGeaney, Dr. Esther McGeaney, who's co-author with Alice Hoyle of the book Great Sex and Relationships Education. And I've been delivering the RSE professional learning in Wales with Esther over the last couple of years using the agenda activities. So our wider team then includes people who've been involved in our agenda youth and practitioner conferences, our agenda training, and they've drawn upon or are planning to draw upon the agenda activities on a whole host of issues. So we sent out a little preparation schedule ahead of the session. As you're already aware now, we've muted your microphones and turned off the camera function, so you're not going to be able to be seen or heard. What we would ask you to do is use the chat box function for comments and the Q&A function for questions. We'd also, because we're going to be covering kind of a range of different sensitive issues, it's also to think about the space that you're in. So it's not a confidential space, and maybe you can use headphones. There's a little activity at the end. If you have pen and paper, if we get to that bit, you can participate there. And just so you know that the session is being recorded, so that includes the video that we're creating here, but also comments and the questions. Okay. So to kick off, we thought we'd begin with a very quick agenda activity. Usually in a face-to-face session, we'd offer you one of these, a little pipe cleaner here, and we'd ask you to create a stick figure and mould it into a shape that captures how you're feeling right now, and then we'd ask the person next to you to guess that feeling. So Kate and I have prepared our own. So what I'm going to do now is share my stick figure with you, and then if you use the chat box function to pop in there, type in how you think or what you think the feelings are, that I'm trying to sort of represent in this stick figure. So I'll try and put it a bit closer to the camera. There we go. Now I can't see the chat box, but Kate can.
So we've got confused, uncertain, confused, angry, curious, unsure, questioning, needing answers, confused, unsure,
yeah.
Life full of huge questions, inquisitive. Yeah, a lot of questioning.
Okay. A lot of questioning, yeah. The question is pretty big on this. So you have guessed, there's a huge question mark that I'm holding here, and it's kind of with rainbow colours. So the rainbow colours are firstly really to connect to the ways in which the rainbow has become a symbol of hope and gratitude to all the key workers in these quite difficult times. So that first feeling is one of hope and promise and gratitude to all of you who are joining us at the start of a new school year and perhaps at the end of an online or face-to-face school day. I've also got, if you can see, a sparkly blue tummy, and that's to capture sort of feelings of excitement and also, you know, a bit of fear and nerves as well. This is our third webinar, and we're learning fast from you all about how agenda as taster sessions like these might support you. We're really very used to sharing agenda through doing. So we kind of usually invite you to read or hold or touch the different artifacts that children and young people have made. So it's quite a challenge to try and capture what agenda can do, what it can offer in a digital space like this. And the question mark, which you've all picked up on, is because I do think we need to take a leap of faith. So I am leaping, if you can see, with my question mark, because we are kind of stepping into the unknown about what might be possible now. So that's kind of what I'm trying to capture there. Okay, Kate, can I ask you to share your little figure?
Yeah, so this is my figure. So if you want to have a guess in the chat box as to what feelings this is depicting. So we've got help, welcome, needing a hug, wanting a hug, open to suggestions, excitement, searching, friendly, wobbly, big amount to do, overwhelmed, reaching out, embracing, overstretched. Yeah, so lots of yeah, great guesses there. So yeah, I sort of was trying to depict sort of welcoming you to this session with big open arms, and know that it's a very difficult time for teachers at the moment, and kind of sending solidarity and support as you all go back into school. And yeah, we're really delighted that so many of you have decided to join us today for this session. I'm really excited to share agenda with you.
Great. So as a webinar, we can't, you know, I'd love to have sort of posted out all sort of pipe cleaners so you could do your own sort of sharing of feelings, but maybe if you can maybe pop in the chat box just some of the feelings you have right now as you're kind of entering into this session, or just thinking ahead really in terms of what what's happening in your lives.
So we've got a lot of anxiety and nerves and uncertainty and tiredness and apprehension and overwhelm coming through here. Angry at management, trepidatious, cautious, concerned, yearning for normality, exhausted, nervous, but happy that today went well.
Thank you. Brilliant. So a lot of what we'll be doing today is kind of, you know, finding out how to attune to all these different feelings for ourselves, but also for the children and people in our schools. This activity in agenda is called Wired Bodies. So again, you know, it might give you a specific way of approaching this activity, but you can use it kind of on any issue, or just really openly, just in terms of how we're feeling right now. And it'll come back. I'll share the film later. Everybody Matters, and you'll see the pipe cleaners in action there as children kind of turn them into different figures to express how they feel. Okay, so I want to start with a little bit of background about my own research and the making of the agenda resource. For just over 20 years now, I've been drawing a range of creative research methods to listen to children and young people on often sensitive areas, including but not limited to gender, sexuality and relationship cultures. And a lot of my research has taken me into lots of different settings, including nurseries, primaries, secondary schools, youth groups, residential settings, public spaces like shopping malls or skate parks, or even going up mountains with young people, and increasingly researching in online, so digital and social media spaces as well. And like many researchers, I've been working directly with young people in supporting them to speak up about and influence policy, practice and change in the broad area of relationships and sex education. So over the last few years, this has included co-creating the online agenda resource, which itself has a long history. So if you go onto the website, you can read all about its development in Wales, first as a young people's guide, then as a resource supporting practitioners in primary schools. And then with the support of the NEU last year, it's now an interactive online toolkit with additional resources for practitioners and lots of case studies from England and Wales. And we've recently been collecting a range of international case studies, which we hope to share later in the year. And I don't know if you remember, but on our very first opening slide, we have a picture of these ribbon-bearing kites. And we chose this image intentionally because agenda is all about harnessing the power of creative methods to listen to young people. So at its heart then, agenda is very much about making pupil voice matter through being creative with how we listen to and learn from young people on matters that affect them. So it isn't a prescriptive toolkit. It doesn't host a series of lesson plans like some resources do. It's actually been written as a series of suggestions for practitioners like yourselves to adapt and build on creatively. So if you were to sum up agenda in one slide, it looks something like this. It's a resource for practitioners who want to empower children and young people to make positive relationships matter. It has equality, inclusivity, children's rights and social justice at its heart. And it offers creative ways to support children and young people to explore and express what matters to them. And of course, it can help practitioners develop inclusive, rights-respecting relationships and sex education. It's also a timely resource, so it taps into how children and young people around the world now are initiating or working with others to find ways to communicate and share, sometimes call out and change the new twists and turns of quite enduring and various forms of inequalities, discrimination and violence on a range of RSC issues. So through case studies and lots of different activities, which we're sharing with you this evening, Agenda invites you to explore inclusive, creative and rights-based approaches to a range of issues that you can see on the slide here. So feelings and emotions, friendships, gender norms, equity and equality, positive or healthy relationships, body image and consent, gender, sexuality and relationship rights, and gender-based and sexual violence. But if you can have a look at this word cloud here, agenda covers a much broader range of topics. So if you click on the terms in this word cloud on the website, they'll take you to a place in the resource where you can find out more about how that issue or a way of approaching that issue. So if you need further support on any of these, you'll see at the bottom of the slide there, you can look at UNESCO's sexuality education guidance, because it offers evidence-based, developmentally appropriate aims and learning objectives for practitioners to adapt to make their own. So these will really help you develop these ideas further if you're kind of undertaking and exploring a more holistic relationships and sex education. So let's take a closer look at some of the activities. This is a screenshot from the website. So there's lots of different sections in Agenda, and we're going to focus on 3 core sections that make up the bulk of the resource: getting started, ideas for change, and making positive relationships matter, which include a series of case studies from different projects in schools. So getting started, This gives you different activities to support children to think and feel about what matters to them. And you can adapt all of these activities to any topic really of your choice. So I'm just going to walk you through the stop, start, plate activity. So if you take a look at some of the text here, these comments were collected from young people aged 12 to 18 across 2 events in 2016 and 2017. It was a workshop about what they wanted to stop in relation to what they were learning about sex and relationships in school, but also more widely in terms of society. So I'll just read a couple out. Stop joking about periods. Stop catcalling me. Stop weight shaming. Stop the labels. I am not a label, I am me. Stop homophobia. I'll slide with them on here. Stop the stigma around mental health. We need more support systems. Stop using the female body as an excuse for feeding rape culture. Stop sexism in PE. Stop objectifying me, I'm not your property. Stop and ask instead of assuming people's emotions. And make it normal for anyone to openly speak about how they're feeling, no matter what age. We'll come back to the stop, start, plate activity when we share the films, and also when Kate introduces this task later as one of our agenda during COVID activities. So the second core section of the resource is called Ideas for Change. So this provides you with different methods that have been used by young people in England and Wales and around the world to raise awareness on many different issues across many different organisations. So we've got lots of different examples, vlogging, hashtag campaigns, memes, music, posters, protests, movement and dance, youth groups, visual arts, poetry, and many more. Each of them have their own icon, which were designed with young people, and each page connects you to a key RSE issue, such as sexual exploitation, or it could be the gender pay gap, or it could be sexism in the music industry. And each page has an information icon where you can find out more. So I'm just going to show you a couple of examples so you can see how each of them play out. So if you click onto the icon for social media, you're connected to Bernardo's Helping Hands hashtag campaign, and this invites young people to raise awareness of CSE, child sexual exploitation. And this page also connects you to the Me Too movement and a range of organisations addressing gender inequity, justice and violence worldwide. Here is an example of school assemblies. These can be a powerful way to raise awareness. And if you don't want to stand up in person or in front of your peers or teachers, you could use a film or other media or visual arts to share your ideas. So the example here was a group who held a week of feminist assemblies, and they included topics such as sexist comments in school and sport. They looked at gender and racial stereotyping in Disney films. They looked at sexism in the orchestra and heteronormative bullying of boy-girl friendships and body image in the media. So lots and lots of different topics. Another example is looking at movement and dance, and how movement and dance can play a really powerful role in communicating experiences that are sometimes difficult to put into words. So here we give the example of the 1 Billion Rising movement, one of the biggest mass actions addressing violence against women, and which has a growing number of young people taking part. So the idea then is that you and your students might be able to learn about each issue through the change-making practices of other young people and organisations. So the aim of this section, like the entire resource really, is trying to explicitly set out to counter all the negative ways in which many of these issues are framed and foregrounded in policy and practice, by offering a more kind of positive or affirmative way in to engage some of these quite difficult issues. So the third core section is full of stories which show just how creative you can be in supporting children and young people to explore and express how they feel as they learn about some of these core areas. So we've got 28 in total. It's a little bit overwhelming on one slide. I'll just take you through a few of them so you can see the kinds of projects and case studies that are included in the resource. So here we have on this was Sam's story. addressing bullying cultures in school through art and stories and drama and helping hands. iMotion, this is a little project looking at exploring difficult feelings through selfies, vlogging, glitching and GoPro cameras. Meltdown, reimagining challenging behaviour with masks, crystal paints and cabinets of curiosity, all things that we'll be covering later. Body reforming, so creating textile sculptures to spark conversations about how beauty standards impact our bodies and communities. Under pressure, so this was using the physics curriculum and looking at concepts of forces to explore coercion and control through sound, movement and a glitch art app. And smashing commercial sexism, so this was challenging commercial sexism with Year 6 students in a Lego workshop. So I'm just going to explore one example in depth so you can see how the case studies are written up and how you might be able to use and adapt them. So I've chosen this one, the Ruler Heart project, because this story really did kickstart the agenda resource. So the Ruler Heart case study tells a story of the Relationship Matters Lunch Club and how a group came together to talk about girls' experiences of sexual harassment. And during this group, one girl spoke about how some boys lift up girls' skirts with rulers. And this sparked a conversation about how girls' experiences of sexual harassment are often ruled out, so they could be silenced or normalised, and how schools are not measuring up because they don't address these issues very well. They also talked about how being like a girl or woman has been ruled and regulated through history and continues today. So very quickly, they wanted to rewrite the rules. So on printed paper rulers and also acrylic rulers, the girls began to graffiti all the negative things they wanted to stop from happening, like abusive sexual banter, and then some positive things that they wanted to start, like slogans like respect us. So this is one of the rulers that they created and that they eventually turned into a ruler skirt. So you can see just one of them from here. So eventually they created something that looks a little bit like this. It's very noisy. There's many of these. So the ruler skirt became something very powerful because it was making visible the hurtful and often hidden experiences that can happen to girls, and it was turning them into, or trying to turn them into something positive, something that might raise awareness of these issues. They also collected the views of over 200 young people in their schools using the paper rulers now in a school assembly. And so it started from their little group and then opened up and asked other young people how they felt too. So many of the case studies, when you explore them, provide further web resources to follow and different methods to spark your interest. So if you look at the information icon for the Ruler Heart case study, this includes reading more about skirt activism and sexist uniform policies, and also different creative activisms to address gender and sexual violence. There's also a multimedia function, so there are films attached to some of the case studies. This one you can listen into their poem and view their film. Each case study also kind of includes a pull-out, what we call a pull-out DIY. So I shared the why bodies earlier. So we take a little bit of the case study and then we create something so that you can adapt it really in any ways in which you want to. And this is what we've done with the COVID during agenda activities. So if you look here for the Relationship Matters case study, there's a DIY called Reassembling the Rules. And you can see here how you can invite students to reassemble the rules on any topic. And in the PowerPoint, I've got a link to the film of primary school children writing down what rules they would like to change to advance gender equality. And I'll show this at the very end of the session today to play us out. So you'll get to see those rules in action. So it's often quite difficult to get a sense of how agenda has been used in schools from a series of PowerPoint slides and me chatting to you like this. So before we invite you to share in the chat box what you think about the resource and hear from the teachers, we're just going to show a couple of digital stories of how one primary school and one secondary school have been drawing upon some of the agenda activities to listen to children and young people. The first one is focused on feelings in the context of diversity and difference. The second one is focused on RSE in school. And while some of the sections of the film relate specifically to the Welsh policy context, the activities are kind of what we're drawing your attention to. So as you're watching the film, have a think about which activities you might be able to adapt in your own setting, which should set us up nicely for when Kate discusses how you might want to carry out your own creative audit around well-being using some of the COVID adapted agenda activities. So our first film then, Everybody Matters.
I don't know. Dwi ddim yn gwybod. I don't know. Dwi ddim yn gwybod. I feel. Dwi ddim yn gwybod. I don't know. I don't know. If you're feeling down, they look sad. And if they like acting confident, they're happy. If he's strange. If you're feeling down, they look sad. And if they like acting confident, they're happy. Arbed fy negon. If you're feeling down, they look sad. Like acting confident, they're happy. If he's strange, I feel. I feel. Stop gender stereotypes. Stop sexism. Stop racism. Stop your bullying. Stop your hilly eye. I want to stop making fun of boys that want to try to be like girls and girls want to try to be boys, and like stop sexism and transphobia. I want to stop making peace in the world. Start accepting us for who we are. Stop your homophobia.
I'm probably going to stop everyone being treated differently for the way they look and the way they act and what they wear.
Stop your flag ban. Listen more to the positive energy around. Don't listen to negative. Stop being sexist. Stop bullying. Stop saying boys can't do this and girls can't do that. Stop being nice to people. Be nice. Stand down at your knee.
Listen to us, what we're saying right now.
share with you now some of the children's reflections on being part of the Everybody Matters project.
I liked tracing each other. I like make shapes like without feeling. I enjoyed the one when we had to express our feelings to our partners, and then they had to do it back to us. And I also liked as well when we had to have partners, we had to trace around each other. Like, say now if you were sad, you have to trace around like a sad spot. If you were like excited or happy, then you had to trace around a happy spot. I like the movement because it's getting people active. I like where we've done the big body out of the images, and when we done the walkway. It's when you have to put all your feelings down. I like doing the dances and different moves. I've liked all of it, but my favourite has got to be like the foil. I like the foil on like your hand, your stomach and your face. And I like the part where one person like lies down on the piece of paper and the other one draws. I liked like another part where you like walk with like your plates, and then you do and then like strike a pose. I have enjoyed tracing bodies, and when we've been talking about equality and happiness and Donald Trump and all that.
Probably all of it, because it was all really fun and it's been one of the best things I've done in school.
So I'm now going to play the film Making Space, and you'll see the plates return again and some additional agenda activities. You'll also get to meet Alex in a moment in our Q&A panel, who features one of the teachers that features in the film.
Make space for us. Make space for us.
Rhywfaint o leini. Do you know what I mean? Ti'n gwybod be dwi'n feddwl?
Make space for us.
Ti'n gwybod be dwi'n feddwl?
Make space for us.
Rhywfaint o leini. Ti'n gwybod be dwi'n feddwl? Do you know what I mean? Ti'n gwybod be dwi'n feddwl? Do you know what I mean?
Make space for us.
Ti'n gwybod be dwi'n feddwl?
Space for us. Make space for us.
Ti'n gwybod be dwi'n feddwl?
They want to tell me what they think. Yeah, that's really interesting. Do you think we do accept people that are different? Do you think we do? Think we're good at that here? I think everybody's good at that. Not so much.
By giving you a little bit of a voice today, you telling me what you want to learn about, that's quite empowering as well, isn't it? me, it's all about what the pupils need to get out of it, you know. And if we don't do that, then we're not, again, if you go back to the 4 purposes, they're not going to be ambitious, capable learners. They're not going to be ethical, informed citizens if we don't allow them to shape the curriculum, really. Which is what the data allows you to do. And I obviously like it because it's creative ways of collecting data. It's about always creating new things and new ways of capturing people ideas, people opinions.
You know what I mean?
Make space for us.
Think of it,
Make space for us. Make space for us.
Do you know what I mean?
Make space for us. Space for us. Space for us. Space for us.
Do you know what I mean?
Space for us. Space for us. Space for us. Make space for us. Make space for us. Space for us. Space for us. Space for us.
It seems to me that co-construction is an overused term, but when you look at what young people want to learn and want to discuss about relationships, sexuality, it seems that as senior leaders and as teachers that we can learn a lot about what it is that they view as important and what it is that we need to help them with so they can navigate their very complicated and very challenging childhood and time as young adults. And I think if we don't listen to what the young people are telling us, we're just going to miss the boat.
It's given me the opportunity to feel like I can be myself no matter what, and that school will be there for me.
Okay, so that was a bit of a whistle-stop tour to the agenda resource. I hope the films kind of started to bring to life some of the ways in which the agenda activities can be used and adapted. But now it's a chance to hear from the teachers and practitioners about how they've been using and adapting or planning to adapt the agenda resource. So I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and share a little bit of that with you. And now's your chance really to type in those questions that you have. I think you're already beginning to do so into the Q&A function. And then Sally will collect up some questions and we'll try and respond as we go, but also respond kind of on synchronously as well. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen and bring us in. So Marina, do you want to share your video? Alex, Mark? There we are. So I don't know who wants to go first. Mark, would you like to begin? Maybe just sort of, introducing your school and maybe how you've kind of started to use the agenda activities, even returning to school. So it's totally up to you how you like to kick off.
Hi, my name is Mark Lewis. I'm the head of drama in a school Gyfyng Gymraeg Plas Mawr in Cardiff, a Welsh medium comprehensive, and I'm the Equalities lead teacher in the school. We've been using Agenda for a number of years now, since its inception, and it's given us a great opportunity to really tap into what the pupils, what they're really feeling, what they're really thinking. In the stop-start plates in particular that we use sort of give pupils the opportunity to write down confidentially their own thoughts that they want to share, whereas possibly they wouldn't be that confident in vocalizing those opinions. So actually nobody knows who's written anything, and so we can go and we can discuss the ones that sort of come up most frequently. We can discuss ones that pupils want to choose themselves for us to discuss. So it gives them the opportunity to be autonomous and move forward with their own, with what they want to learn, more than anything, I think.
Have you got plans in terms of using Agenda as you?
Well, yeah, we're literally starting back. So I think we will be moving forward and using RSE, and we'll be creating those lessons afresh, seeing how we can adapt those for socially distanced times, and ensuring that is the sort of underpins most of our. We have 3 lessons a week of well-being for year 7 and 8 at the moment, and we use a lot of Agenda resources there. So the wired body to discuss how we feel, the stop-start plates we've used, the walkway. So that's all in the schemes of work for those well-being lessons in particular.
Great, thanks, Mark. Alex, do you want to share how you've been working with Agenda? It's been a couple of years now. I've noticed some of the comments about, how can we, what does it mean? How has it made a difference? So you're talking about attitudinal change and how it makes a difference to young people. It's a very difficult thing to capture. So for Agenda, we capture it ongoing, longitudinally, and also the schools themselves are generating data and information all the time, and we're sort of working with that. But Alex, because you've been working again, like Mark, for a few years, it might be nice to kind of also respond to what you've noticed and how you map some of that attitudinal change, because it's also about the schools being able to evaluate the data and learn from the practices of what they're doing.
Yeah, and I think the beauty of it is that you're able to capture stuff without sort of knowing what pupil has said what, so it gives it that autonomy, but it's also, you can capture it quite quickly. So I try to do creative audits, we call them, where we're capturing pupil opinions and helping them shape the curriculum every year, so that I'm able to then implement what they want to see in their curriculum. But obviously during this time I haven't managed to grab them yet to shape them this year, but that's my plan now in the next couple of weeks, is to adapt some of the resources again, and touch base with the new year 7s that are joining me. I'm a secondary school in Bridgend, which is an area just outside of Cardiff, and I'm in charge of health and wellbeing and RSE there. So that's my plan for the next couple of weeks. I've actually got a wired body today. I've just done this with my staff today.
Okay.
So all the staff in school have been making some wide bodies about how they're feeling about returning to school this week after a pandemic. And this is an example that my daughter made this morning for me on the trip to school. So she's really looking forward to going back to school with her giant heart shaped balloon. She's missing everybody. So I think another great thing about the Agenda resource is how inclusive it is. So from my daughter at the age of 7 creating this for me this morning about how she's feeling, right up to the staff this afternoon, and then making them and telling us about how they feel about facing teaching in this bizarre time.
Thanks, Alex. Are you in your car, by the way?
I am. I'm not driving though.
Thank you. No, right, clearly. I know. I really appreciate you joining us as well. Sort of a transition.
Yeah, I'm on my way home from school. So
fantastic. The new classroom there.
A new classroom.
Maureen, are you there? Is Maureen there? Yes, she is. Hi, Maureen.
Hi.
Hi.
So I'm a teacher in a special school, and we teach children across the range of different disabilities, and quite a large proportion of our children have profound and multiple learning disabilities and difficulties, and we are a 4 to 19 school with lots of different kinds of physical disabilities as well as intellectual ones. So we teach the full range of students, and although Agenda isn't designed for children with SEND, many of the activities are really easily adapted to working with children, with my own children who are basically sensory learners, and all the way through to children with moderate to mild learning disabilities. So I'm planning to use quite a lot of the Agenda COVID resources, as my school's doing a bridging curriculum between now and for the next 4 weeks. And it's designed to support students to be able to say how they feel and to be able to process the experiences that they've had during the lockdown and how it is to come back to school. So some of the resources, I'll just go through a couple of the ones that I've adapted and how I've adapted them. And obviously I haven't tried these yet, so I don't know quite how they're gonna go over. But anyway, I shall share them with you now. Okay, so one of the ones I've adapted is called Cabinets of Curiosity. So this we use to share things that they're finding difficult or things they want to be able to know more about. But for the children in my class, I teach a PMLD class, it's difficult for them to share intellectually what they, anything about themselves. But we felt it might be a really nice way to be able to use, maybe not shoe boxes because they might be too small, but those boxes don't have to be small, they can be larger. So they could be large Amazon boxes, for example, and they could be adults and students that can then work together to decorate the actual box. And then inside for the partitions that you see on the COVID Agenda resources could then be larger so that students can then put in objects that tell other people about them, about the things that they enjoy, about the things that they have missed about school. And those can be done really easily with the students through their natural reactions to resources that they only have in school. These could be textures, these could be sound instruments, these could be pretty much anything that student likes. Some of our students love space band blankets, so attaching a space band blanket in there so that they can play with it is a very valid way to use the resource, I think. And it also creates the opportunity for each child's one to be slightly different, and that they can then be shared across the class with students being able to share themselves in a much more sensory way. So these are ones, that's one that I want to do quite early on. There's also one about masking emotions. So this is about talking about how one might show different parts of oneself to others, but we've adapted it to express how wearing masks might be difficult for people, or understanding why we need to wear them might be difficult for people with intellectual disabilities, and they might find it difficult to not be able to recognize people. So the idea of using a mask with a more traditional mask attached to it, being able to decorate masks and put them on each other, put them on the children. We won't be physically distancing from our children in class, but we will be wearing masks. So it's a good idea to be able to start to make a mask with a child and then show them a mirror with them wearing the mask and not wearing them. And so that they can get used to themselves wearing a kind of paper mask rather than like a real mask, because children don't have to wear them in our school. And that might help to make that transition of seeing lots of people look different and not really understanding why. And that's a start. So I don't know how they're going to go, but and I'm also planning to do some with adults as well, as we have a little bit of time tomorrow on our inset day.
Yeah, it's nice to see how the resource is also being used to check in on how teachers are feeling, and also parents as well, sort of extending that out a little bit. Esther, have you got anything you want to add there before we maybe take some of the, just look at the comments and the questions together?
Yeah, I suppose as I was thinking about what else was to say, I was just looking at some of the questions. So, I mean, I've used the agenda resources in lots of different ways, kind of, I guess, primarily working with EJ to deliver teacher training or professional learning in Wales, and also to adapt them. There's lots of activities in this book I've written with Alice Hoyle where we've kind of adapted the agenda activities as ways of delivering RSE. And more recently, over lockdown and over the summer, I've been adapting them to kind of work with young people as part of youth and community work. So, and that is one of the great things about the agenda resource, is how kind of adaptable it is to different contexts, to kind of wherever you work. So, you know, we've only been able to work in the garden, and all of the activities that we've tried have been really adaptable, and we've kind of been able to like throw in things like working with chalks on the pavements because we're outside, and we've kind of given everyone a box with all their resources in. So every young person's had their own box to kind of limit the, you know, potential transmission of the virus. But then we've also used the boxes, and they've been kind of graffitiing the boxes with things that are important to them, or to say things about themselves, to kind of help us kind of shape what the group's doing. And that's all worked really well. We also, I liked kind of Alex's example of kind of using some of the resources in staff training. That's what we did last night. We're about to reopen our youth centre post lockdown, so we used the jars activity where kind of every member of staff had a jar, and we had to say kind of what was jarring us about reopening the centre, and that worked really well. It's just such a great way of opening up a discussion about kind of all the things that I'm sure loads of you are feeling as well, like lots of concerns about how to, you know, build different kinds of relationships with young people and manage those relationships. But I saw there was a couple of questions. One of them was about kind of training for staff around working with creative methods. And that's a good point, because we've kind of got, well, Alex and Mark, for example, who are here today, are both, you know, drama teachers by training. So these methods work really well to kind of their kind of area comfort zones. But we've, in the professional learning we do, we kind of create a space where everyone tries the activities out together, and then everyone goes away and does their creative audits, and then they come back and share them with each other. And when we've evaluated the training, people say that kind of the sharing is as important as the kind of training itself, and that teachers really get confidence from being able to try things out, but also kind of really seeing the inspiring work that other teachers are doing. So I think, as well as training, it is also about people being able to share their stories and share the examples of the work they're doing. But I was also thinking of one teacher we had, she was a PE teacher who said, you know, oh, I didn't want to do anything too creative. She wasn't, you know, that wasn't her comfort zone, but she found other ways of using the resource. So she got kind of 3 celebrations or hero tubs, like those kind of chocolate tubs, and she asked people to put she was kind of map what the RSE at their school, like what had they learned when in one of the celebrations tubs, how had they learned it, and then what if was the other tub, like what if they could do things differently. Now I would argue that is creative, because that's thinking differently about how do you use the resources in your school to kind of engage with young people and get their views. But for her, that wasn't pushing her too far out of her comfort zone. She didn't have to draw or make anything, and that kind of enabled, that was sort of part of a really fantastic project that she did. So I think because of its adaptability, and it's not, you don't have to be an artist or good at making things, you just have to be comfortable perhaps working with stuff, working with kind of things, and of kind of being really open to listening to young people.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Kate will talk in a moment about one of the research reflection pieces we've written for the NEU on using creative methods to address or you know, sort of difficult, sometimes sensitive issues. So we've kind of got a few more examples now. What does being creative mean? And one of them might be, you know, artistic in the sense that we kind of, you know, might be creating an artifact, but it's also about, you know, using imagination, you know, thinking differently. It's about ethics and all sorts of different issues. So you can certainly, we've got the link to that later, so people can take a look. Really, just 2 pages really of just what does it mean to be creative? How can we get there, with examples as well from schools who are doing it in different ways.
EJ, can I just say something to 2 questions on those? One from Sonia and one from Cecilia. So Cecilia's questions about how can you make sort of being limited as a sort of one teacher and not being able to make whole school changes. I think one of the things that's really powerful, and again I think like Alex in particular could say things about this, is if you gather data, so you gather the views of hundreds of young people, which is what Alex did, and you have kind of plates or little hearts or little piece of paper with all of their comments and views on them, then that's really powerful if you then do something with that material that you've created. So if you work with your students to kind of, Alex made a film in one instance of sort of photographing each comment and put, you know, a very sort of simple film, we don't need to be a kind of great filmmaker to do it, or kind of making a display or making some way of kind of sharing what children have said, then what children and people tend to say is so powerful that it's really hard for those views to be ignored. So what we found is when teachers take, in whatever way they've decided to share it, some people take the boxes of stuff right into the room. If they share it with governors, with parents, with teachers, then all those other adults find it as powerful as kind of we do when watching those films or working with the children and young people. So we've worked with lots of teachers who've perhaps also worked at maybe more conservative schools or schools where they've met resistance, and they found that starting small has been really powerful. So start working with one group and start really listening, and then thinking about what you do once you've been listening. How do you share what you've heard creatively? And it kind of starts a process that in some schools is quite slow and in some schools is quite fast. And I suppose in relation to Zoe's comments, I think that works with parents as well. So we've had one teacher, for example, who she created bothering boxes, where she kind of she was in a special needs school, got students to put kind of what bothered them in these boxes, and then she took those boxes to parents. So she'd set up sort of parental coffee mornings, so she shared children's views, but she also bought bothering boxes for parents to say what was bothering them about RSE or more widely. So also kind of using some of the agenda activities with parents as well to create space for them to talk about their objections, because we need to hear and kind of deal with their objections rather than kind of, you know, perhaps trying to pretend they're not there.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if Mark, Maureen or Alex, do you want to come in there about working with some of the gender activities as a way of bridging those relationships between either governors or even senior management or parents, communities?
Yeah,
met challenges and overcome them, or?
Yes and no. Yes, I mean, I think yes, of course. I mean, like it's not doing something different is always hard. If you're the one that's presenting something different, so in my school I'm presenting this as different, and people always have, there's some natural resistance, because the first thing that pops into people's mind is this going to be more work? See, the first hurdle you've got to go overcome is, no, it's actually not going to be more work, because all the work's actually done for you. So then you've got some people on site. And what I'm doing is I'm actually piloting in my own class. So I want to try and adapt some of these resources so that once other people get a hold of them, they'll be slightly more adapted anyway, because I've had a go and it's successful in my class. They get to see what's happened in my class. I get to share those resources, and that sometimes helps people to get on board with it. I think there's a question about some of the agenda resources tackling issues that perhaps parents might not be comfortable with. And I think I'm responsible for PHSE and RE in my school. And I think that before you do anything, it's always best to canvass the views of your parents. If you've got some parents, or you think you might have some parents who will have objections, I would suggest that you're really upfront with those parents or all parents. So in the past, I've always had an opportunity for parents to come in and be able to talk to me about any changes to the RSE curriculum or the PHSE curriculum. And after they've been able to talk to you about it, it's very rare for parents to continue to to object. They just want to know that whatever you're teaching their child is age and stage appropriate, usually. And the other question, there's a question in there that's really interesting, and I just feel that it's really hard if you're very new to teaching, or if you started teaching in the last 15 years, because the successive governments have progressively made it much harder for teachers to think independently about their work, to have permission to be able to try new things, fail even, and learn from that failure, and do things differently. It's very, very prescriptive. But actually, so we find more resistance from our students. I think that resistance is increasing from students. We get more behavior, more difficulties teaching, because what we're teaching them, what we're forced to teach them, excludes them as humans. So we don't have the opportunity to ask them, what do they want to learn? And what do they care about? And I find that the more you ask them what they care about, and the more you give them the things that they love, the more their behavior the more you get them on side, and the less behavior you get. And I don't know if Alex and Mark can comment on that.
It's quite a different context in Wales, isn't it? I think, but you still might meet some of that resistance.
Do you want me to, sorry, I can't hear myself. Do you want me to, I did a creative audit with our governors, and the after sort of doing it with the pupils, just to bring them in on what we were doing. And actually it was harder to do it with the governors, because they just wanted to talk about their own experiences and their lack of relationships, sex education, and they were quite jealous that the young people were getting such a wide variety of and opportunity to speak about what they wanted to speak about. They just didn't stop talking, so I didn't really reach the end of the creative audit because they wanted to, their jars were rammed. So the question I asked was, what jarred you about your own sex education? And it was mainly the lack of it, or the lack of diversity. In terms of parents, I also tried 2 or 3 times to get parents to come and take part in a creative audit. I sent a letter out and I said exactly what I wanted them to, what I was going to do, what the nature of the research was, and 3 times nobody turned up. So I take that as parental permission to proceed, I think. In terms of attitudinal change, I want to come to that. I think when we're working like this, and it's what the pupils want, and actually what's really powerful is other pupils see what other pupils think. And when other people see what other pupils think, it gives them permission to behave and to think in the way that they believe they should. So if somebody is saying, if there are 32 plates saying stop homophobia, and there's one person there who's like, oh, should I join in the homophobic name calling, or should I stop it? It gives them that permission. Actually, everybody around me thinks the same. And so actually you can start working and unpicking why people are using homophobic slurs, biphobic, transphobic slurs. So we've seen huge attitudinal change in our school just by pupils permitting other pupils to speak openly, I think.
And I think one of the things that we hadn't really sort of mentioned as we were talking, but hopefully picked up in the films, is many of the methods of a kind of listening and noticing what's going on for young people, is collecting that kind of those expressions in anonymous ways. So it doesn't immediately start, it might be that of individual student or parent or teacher, but it doesn't go straight back to them. So it's anonymous, and then you collect them all together. And I think it's really important on many of these difficult issues to enable young people to say how they feel without someone knowing it's their thoughts, but they're still in the room, and people, like you say, can share and listen, and watch and read and learn across. So it's,
could I just
collecting up.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Pick up on Cecilia's question here about being a class teacher and then likely to make whole school change. I'm just a class teacher, and I think it's just that idea of going to your management and saying, can I just try this, and explain to them, I'll bring back the research, I'll tell you, be open with that group's parents, be open with your governors if you have to. But I think in terms of being a model of change is never going to happen unless you ask for it to happen. And that's I'm just really cheeky with my management, and I just say, this is what I want to do, this is what please can I just do this in my own time, and do it with one group and see their realization of what your pupils want to talk about, and then open it out then to the rest of the school.
Alex, do you want to come back on any of the issues or any of the questions you're seeing?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say I agree with Mark in the fact that I've had to be a little bit more sort of nag my SLT and be a little bit more brave in approaching them. And I think if you have got that pupil response with you, it's very hard to try and say no when you're trying to make changes. So that's why that pupil response through the plates and the jars is so important to have with you. The other thing I've noticed, just because of the way that the data is sort of collected through creative ways, is it creates that sense of mystery and intrigue in school. You know, I did a project called Don't Bottle It Up, which was all about emotions and emotions that we bottle up and that we don't talk about, and I did that through plastic bottles. So I actually put a plea out to staff and to pupils, could I have their plastic bottles rather than recycling them? And just that message and the collection of those bottles created so much intrigue that pupils were desperate to have a go at the session and see how those bottles would be used. So I think that's something great about it too.
A bit of mystery.
Yeah.
I think we're going to have to move on because some of the questions are now also about how can we do this in new contexts with social distancing, and Kate will come on to that. I don't know, Esther, if you've got anything to say. I'm just looking at, we might have to come back to some of the questions, and particularly one about, you know, the extent to which you only ever ask children people what they think, and then that is the curriculum. I don't think we're ever suggesting that, but it's a really, really important starting point. To find out where children are at in their learning, what they're thinking and doing and listening and watching, letting them express themselves. And then, of course, you'll have your kind of wider curriculum in terms of the kind of different gaps you might need to plug. Have you got anything you want to add on that point, Esther?
Yeah, I think in response to John's question, just simply, it's about not just working with what young people know. So part of it is asking, you know, what have you learned and what would you like to learn? But that is limited, because exactly as the comment says, you only know what you know. We have got tools for kind of doing sort of holistic mapping, so using resources like the kind of UNESCO resource to kind of help map across the curriculum. We've got a specific resource for the kind of Welsh across the different areas learning, which really has worked really well for expanding what people think RSE is or what it can be. So there are ways, kind of resources you can use to kind of broaden ideas around knowledge, but it's not about just working with knowledge. It's also about working with feelings and working with bodies and working with values. So a lot of what goes on the stop and start plates might not be what's in the curriculum. It's just what young people are passionate about, what they're angry about, or, you know, there's lots of other activities around what people love and what people care about. And so it's kind of then interpreting and using those young people's responses to build your curriculum. So it's I guess it's never as straightforward as like, what do you want to know, and kind of here it is. It's about kind of doing a kind of range of activities with different groups of young people to kind of just kind of listen to what comes out, and then kind of use that to build the curriculum.
Great, thanks, Esther. So we'll move on now to Kate. Kate, if you want to share your screen, and there'll be opportunity at the end after Kate's presentation to ask further questions, and then to think yourselves how you might want to get started in maybe engaging with the resource a bit further. Kate.
Great, thank you, EJ. So yes, as you've seen and heard, the agenda resource is full of ideas and information, as well as stories to help children and young people to explore difficult to articulate feelings and emotions. And in light of the current unsettling times, the Agenda team have adapted some activities specifically to assist those supporting children and young people through the COVID-19 pandemic. So during lockdown, some teachers and practitioners drew on these activities to support their work with key worker children and through homeschooling. So on this slide, you can see RSE practitioner Alice Hoyle drawing on the Agenda Masking Emotions DIY in her health and wellbeing work with a group of Year 3 children. And the right-hand image shows a mindfulness jar created at home by a Year 8 from Pencoe Comprehensive, which is an adaptation of the Agenda What Jars You DIY, and you also saw it in the Making Space video. So in the next few slides, we explore these Agenda DIYs in further detail and how Agenda can be used as part of a creative wellbeing audit as schools begin to open more widely. So you've already heard a little bit about creative audits in the Making Space video and from Alex in the Q&A. And while these were being used to prepare their schools for changes to the RSE curriculum, we believe that creative audits are also a valuable tool for checking in with the well-being of children and young people who are adapting to the changes that COVID-19 restrictions are bringing to school life. So by using a wide range of expression, you can create spaces for children to feel, think, question, and share sensitive or difficult issues that might be coming up in these unsettling times. And working the creative mode enables us to become more aware of what matters to children, and it can allow you to collect feelings and views anonymously. So research states that creative and arts-based methods can enable children and young people to articulate experiences and feelings that rarely surface in solely talk-based approaches. And we've produced a research brief for the NEU that summarises the key research in this area about the power of creative methods for exploring sensitive issues with children and young people. And we'll post the link to this in the chat after my presentation, and it's also available in the Google Drive. So the following activities that I'll introduce could be completed in one lesson, or across a series of lessons. And if it's possible, you could also think about dedicating 1 week as a listening week to see how each year group are responding to the changes at school. So when preparing for these listening activities, we encourage you to carefully consider the space that you will be using, particularly given the space that you'll need for social distancing. You may choose different venues for different activities, as well as different times of day, depending on the students that you want to engage. Modelling consent is also key to creating a safe and inclusive environment. So at the beginning of each session, be clear about why you're doing the activity and how you'll be using the findings. Trust, confidentiality, and anonymity are central. In a creative wellbeing audit, young people can choose not to take part at any time, without having to give a reason. So if anyone looks as if they don't want to participate, remind them that their participation is voluntary. If it's difficult to send them back to class, provide an alternative activity that allows them to sort of check out of the activity that you're running. Before you begin putting these activities to work, we would also encourage you to revisit the section on safety and support on the Agenda website. In addition, a valuable activity to begin with before exploring sensitive issues with children and young people is the Agenda Support Cloud. So this helps children and young people identify who they can turn to if they need support, advice, or to make a disclosure. So working with an outline of a cloud, children and young people are invited to name all of the people that they would go to if they were worried about themselves or another person. And you can also help them fill in the gaps. Once the children have finished their support cloud, you could make a support mobile that can be on display in class as a visual reminder for how, why, and where children can seek additional support and advice. This can then be referred back to throughout the creative wellbeing audit. Another good starter activity is Wired Bodies, which has been demonstrated at the beginning of this training session and through Alex's Q&A as well, and this is a good way of checking in with how everybody is feeling in their bodies. In addition, the activity Runaway Feelings is a good way for checking in with how everyone's doing. So sometimes our feelings about how the world is suddenly changing around us can run away with us. And this activity provides a space for children and young people to release all their thoughts and feelings about the changes to school life. So ordinarily it would be delivered using a long strip of paper as shown in the right-hand image of the screen. However, we try to think of different ways that this could be adapted given COVID-19 restrictions, because on the videos you would have seen that young people engaging in this activity being quite huddled together and close. So Esther has commented on a number of ways that she's adapted the activity using chalk, working outdoors, or also using like a bigger strip of paper and spacing young people along. And we've also suggested on this activity that you could give each individual child a piece of A3 card and invite them to mindstorm all of the things that need to stop happening to make school life safer, fairer and more equal. And then one by one, the children could place their cards next to each other to create a collective runway. Once the runway is completed, you could invite the children to take it in turns to walk up and down and read the messages for change. And finally, each child could then retrieve their A3 card in order to create a runaway placard like those displayed at the bottom of the page. And these could then be displayed somewhere in the school. Another good starter or activity to check in on how the young people are feeling about the changes to school life during the COVID-19 pandemic is the Stop, Start, Continue plates. So this activity invites students to think about what is or is not working and the changes that they'd like to see to make life better at school. So each child is provided with a red paper stop plate, a green paper start plate, and a purple paper continue plate. If you don't have plates available, you can also just create these yourself by using coloured marker pens and drawing a circle on A4 paper. The children are then invited to think about a time when someone did something that they didn't like or a new rule that's making life difficult at school. And then taking each plate in turn, they're invited to come up with a phrase that describes what they didn't like and write this on the stop plate. Then they could come up with a phrase that describes what they would have liked instead and write this on the start plate. And finally, they could write down something that they think is working well at school and write this down on the continue plate. Once the children have completed their plates, they can then take it in turns to peg them to a line of action. And using a smartphone or a tablet, you could film this line of action with the children's stop, start, continue messages and share this with colleagues as you think about school practice moving forward. So this is a good way of checking in with what young people are struggling with and what they understand about the changes that have been introduced at school. And we suggest that this activity is run at the end of the school week or year to check in on how students feel about the changes in the new rules and what could be done to make school life better. And that way you can also leave them up for 72 hours before collecting them to ensure that it's safe. So those are just a selection of activities that we've adapted in order to support you to check in with how children and young people are feeling about the changes to school life. The next few activities move beyond school to focus on social issues and inequalities highlighted by the pandemic and the feelings that these might be bringing up. So earlier I showed how Alice Hoyle had worked with the Masking Emotions activity during lockdown, and Marine's also shared how she's planning to adapt this activity to work with students in her school. And given that face masks have been a big topic of debate amid the COVID-19 pandemic, this activity invites students to research masks and look at the different uses of masks around the world, as well as the possible social, emotional, and health benefits of masks. So in this activity, we note, for example, that masks have been viewed as a symbol of otherness in the UK, fueling racism and discrimination. However, in many countries, they operate as a symbol of social responsibility and personal protection. Each student is then invited to craft a mask that would be of benefit to them now, in the past, or in the future. This next activity is similar to Wired Bodies in that it checks in with how young people are feeling in their bodies, but by working with clay or Play-Doh. It's particularly useful for reflecting on bodily norms and thinking about the pressure that there's been for us to work on our bodies during lockdown. Next up is changemakers around the world. So this looks at how COVID-19 is a global pandemic that's impacting all members of society and highlights a range of social inequalities. It invites the students to explore someone or something addressing a social inequality highlighted by the pandemic. So students can write a short passage about and illustrate their chosen moment or campaign before pinning their changemaker to a map of the world. If you're working in a large group or with students over a long period of time, you could also challenge them to find an example for every country. And we provide a number of links on this activity for further information that might prompt students to think about the different ways that people are campaigning for change despite COVID-19 restrictions. So, for example, students could map the Black Lives Matter protests that have risen again in recent months and received a lot more media attention. You could also look at the history and roots of mutual aid volunteer coalitions that have a long history in popping up in response to disasters all around the world. You could also look at how young climate activists have continued to campaign online and consider the environmental factors impacting the COVID-19 pandemic. Or my personal favourite looks at how young fans of Korean pop music, or K-pop, became a surprising new activist force during lockdown, disrupting US campaign rallies and police surveillance. And following on from changemakers around the world, the Raging Ralphie's activity works well as a takeaway task. So this activity works with the feelings of anger that can come up when finding out about and experiencing the different kinds of injustices, discrimination, and violence in the world. So on the side of the page, we link to a number of resources on the importance and politics of anger. For example, these links address the gendered and racial politics of expressing anger. And the podcast on anger as a resource for fighting injustice also examines how to harness anger for social change and avoid reacting out of it in ways that manifest as aggression or hatred towards ourselves and others. So this activity starts by asking students to think about areas of social inequality highlighted by the pandemic that makes them angry. So this could be ableism, racial health inequalities, gender-based violence, transphobia, income inequality. It then invites them to research an activist or change-making organisation that addresses this social inequality and screenshot an image that represents the activist or organisation. Using the activist image as a backdrop, students are then invited to take a raging selfie or short video that expresses their anger that these are still issues that need to be addressed in the world today. Then, if you're able to, you could drop these images into an iMovie that could be shared with the whole class to spark discussion. Along similar lines, the All of Us activity explores how it takes all of us to make the world a safer, fairer, and more equal place to be, and recognises the range of people at the forefront of the fight against the pandemic. So this activity starts by presenting students with a range of images of key workers during the COVID-19 pandemics, such as teachers, NHS workers, cleaners, train and bus drivers, utility workers, waste collectors, and so on. And these images can then be drawn upon as prompts to discuss the themes of fairness, equality, and equity, thinking about how societal norms shape which roles are valued and which are often overlooked. And you'll also have access to this PowerPoint in the Google Drive, so you could work with or build upon the images that I've selected here. The activity then introduces the role of activist ribbons as symbols to unite people in their collective support for a cause. So recently, we've seen how the rainbow has become a symbol of support for people wanting to show solidarity with NHS workers on the front line of the pandemic. This activity uses lots of different colours to highlight the diversity of people involved in making the world a safer, fairer, and more equal place. And working with lots of different coloured ribbons, students are invited to create affirmative messages for equality. These ribbons can then be tied to sticks or attached to a kite, so that students have the opportunity to flag the importance of all of us and make equality fly. Again, you could think about making a short digital story about this process to share with parents and colleagues and the wider school community. Finally, the What Jars You DIY is all about exploring how the COVID-19 pandemic is making children and young people feel. The children and young people can work on their own by bringing in a recycled jar from home, Alternatively, you could provide a large jar for each social bubble and a set of post-it notes for each individual child. And then this activity invites students to write down all the things that jar them about the pandemic before decorating the outside of their jar with messages for change to help people cope with this turbulent time. So those are just a selection of activities that we think could be put to work in a creative wellbeing audit. Once you've collected the participants' creations, you can also think about how you will reflect on and share the findings from the audit. So you could detail what you've learned by writing a post for the school blog or Twitter thread, sharing the children and young people's creations. And you could also tag us by using hashtag agenda during COVID. We've also suggested ways in which you could create short digital movies documenting the activities and the process of undertaking the wellbeing audit. And then this could be shared via an assembly or through school displays or in a visual exhibition. And you could also think about drawing on them in a staff meeting or inset day to discuss how findings will inform school practice moving forward. And if you want to learn a little bit more about the challenges and affordances of doing a creative audit in school, then we'd encourage you to check out the Crash resource, which has examples here from primary, secondary and special schools who've undertaken creative audits in preparation for their work introducing the new relationships and sexuality education curriculum.
Thank you, Kate. So I'm muting myself here. I'll put the video back on. Should we swap screens?
Yeah.
Might be easier for later when we share the film. So we've got a good 10 to 15 minutes now. It'd be lovely to hear more from the teachers, but also if you could use the chat box function to maybe think through any of the activities which you think you might like to begin with. Sometimes one of the challenges is just getting started if you've never kind of approached anything like this in this way before. So we've already got some ideas already of how you might want to adapt them, but do pop them into the chat. And any questions you have or concerns, or if you want further resources, then hopefully we can help as well. So just post what you need to know, and we'll try and do as much as we can in the last 10 to 15 minutes to respond. I think the masks activity has kind of inspired a few people. Shireen? So Andrew's asking about, are the materials suitable for Key Stage 1? I'm just thinking, Esther, I mean, in our professional learning, you're right, agenda is for slightly older primary school children, but because the activities are, some of them are very multi-sensory, you can absolutely adapt them for how it might work for younger children. I think Maureen's already shared that in terms of thinking of capacities and how people can connect with some of the activities.
Yeah, and I also think for younger children and also children with disabilities, you don't have to use text. So if they are pre-writing, they could use images. So I'm intending to use the cloud, the support cloud DIY with my class. And what we want to do is be able to change it very slightly from things the children might support, because they might not be able to articulate that, or certainly my class couldn't articulate that. But we might ask their families to write into us and say, what kinds of things have you been focusing on at home? What kinds of things, what kinds of people have your family been supporting? The NHS, it could be Black Lives Matter, it could be women's issues. And if they are, then we could represent them on one side. And on the other side, we could represent things that we as a school might want to say, might want to support. And I think some intergenerational work would be really good, particularly in special schools. So I'm also planning to do the hashtag all of us, making the kites. which is a nice sensory activity anyway, using lots of tissue paper. They can also use images on there to, and I intend for it to be multi-generational between staff and children, because I think staff sometimes get forgotten in all of this, and they might need a way of sort of expressing what they've been feeling. So I might, so I'm going to be asking staff to, on one side of the kite, maybe put things that they would like to support, and then for the children to be able to express support for things that they find important in their lives, and then take them outside and have a go at flying them. We don't know how well it's going to go, but those might be ways of including some younger children as well, who perhaps can't articulate things in words in quite the same way as older children.
I think those are really good examples. I think one of the great things about the agenda resources is so adaptable. So we've had primary teachers who have said things like, oh, I couldn't use the JARS activity because my children just wouldn't understand the concept of what JARS are, either because they're too young, or for young people with ASD, a lot of teachers said, you know, the children I work with are too literal, that wouldn't, that's not a concept that would work. So they've just created other kinds of containers or boxes that children have decorated to kind of capture their concerns. I just saw there's a question about transcribing. We've had lots of teachers in special schools who've worked with the teaching assistants to transcribe for the children, which has worked really well as also flagging for some staff that the teaching assistants needed more training, because sometimes the teaching assistants weren't aware of some of the kind of words and concepts around gender and sexuality that some of the young people were using, but that was a positive thing because it flagged up a sort of training and support need for the teaching assistants. And I was thinking back, because we get asked this every time we do it, and I was looking back to some of what we've done over the years, and the very first year we did this as a pilot training project in Wales. We did have a teacher who did a project with year one where she did a sensory project around touch, and she got things like plasticine and tin, and kind of got kind of the children to touch all these kind of different sensory objects as a way of thinking about good touch and bad touch, or touch I like and touch I don't, and kind of use that as a kind of way into talking about consent. And I think we also had another teacher, I think she did end up working with year 5, but I think what she did would work with younger children when she didn't feel very confident in this area at all, and she was new to RSE, so she just started with activities where she just started working with feelings, which is something I really think you can do with any age and any ability. So she put on happy music and sad music and got the children to dance, and then kind of draw how they felt when they were dancing. She got them to do make a fingerprint tree, to think about how we're all the same but different, and the kind of uniqueness of a fingerprint. So kind of working with some of those activities, I really think they would work with kind of any age, or and kind of most abilities with some support.
I think the other thing I would add as well, looking at some of the questions, is the worry maybe about the jarring one, and there might be some topics that are too sensitive or traumatizing. I think one of the ways is to use a number of topics. You could have a carousel of activities, maybe 3 set up in a classroom. If you're working in bubbles anyway, you might find that might be one way of allowing children to, if they don't really like the idea of an activity, there's another one they can use, because you always want to give them the option maybe not to go there if they don't want to, but you have to kind of structure for that as well, so that they're not visible in not wanting to take part, but they are taking part, and maybe it's a different activity. So that I know when I've worked with special schools before, we've had a carousel of activities. Some things, some young people didn't want to spend any time with because they absolutely couldn't bear the touch of the pipe cleaner or the felt, but they loved a beading activity or working with foil. But for some, foil would just be something they wouldn't want to go near, and it wasn't helping them express their feelings at all. So I think having options and not maybe having just one activity for a big class might be one way around that. Others have asked about, can you do this on a one-to-one? I think absolutely you can do this with one-to-one. I've certainly seen that work in youth settings. That might be much more now how people are going to be working in different ways. So one-to-one is maybe different to kind of on your own. I wasn't sure if that's what you meant, either one-to-one in a private setting or individual activities. A lot of these activities can be individual, and then you can leave as Kate said, leave the plates, if you like, over the weekend, and then bring them together on a Monday morning. I'm just reading some of the comments and in the chat as well.
I think there's a question from an art teacher, I think it's Phil, and he's asking about how perhaps you could be how maybe it might be possible to use some of the agenda activities as part of children's and young people's coursework. And I think that's absolutely possible. In fact, there's I think in the agenda COVID resources, there is an activity that's about making posters. I think it's called something mood. Oh, please help me, Kate.
Mood boards.
There you go, the mood board. I've adapted that myself to make positive posters. So the children are going to be doing some kind of collage-y type posters, and I don't see why that couldn't go into the art curriculum as well. And I think a lot of them lend themselves to that.
I've seen it with some of the teachers we've worked with as well. In some of the schools, there's a case study in the Crush resource called Hearts and Minds, and in there some of the activities were used and extended, and it became a starting point for a piece of coursework. So you can do that.
Emma, AJ, I was going to say as well, we if you saw in our video the LGBT murals that we did, that was actually for us in Wales a Welsh Baccalaureate project as part of their community challenge, but so it definitely doubles up and can be used across the curriculum. There were lots of murals, but that was just one of them that was created by our group called INDOD.
Mark, have you used it in any of your drama as well, media and?
We have used it as a starting point for a discussion on protest art, and sort of we had a day of sort of an Inequalities day where actually a lot of what the individual classes were doing, we used the agenda resources, and we looked at sort of creating protest art that is now sort of all over the school as just statements from the children, and using different ways of creating different mediums and things like that. So yeah, it's a really good start point for any kind of protest art.
Great.
Also, we in terms of coming to what Alex was saying, we've collected shoe boxes a few years ago, and part of that was sort of I think we got 250 shoe boxes donated to the school, and we used them all because they wanted to build a wall like a certain other person, and we built a wall of hate in the main entrance to the school, and on that wall we used graffiti, and we asked people as they were passing, and so it was a point of conversation amongst pupils, and we invited them to graffiti the walls with things that they didn't like and words that they didn't like being used around the school, and it was built literally across the main entrance of the school as a barricade, and it was really difficult to look at it by the end of the week because it was so uncomfortable. And then the whole point of that was then on the Friday lunchtime we demolished it. There's a video on Vimeo of the process, so yeah, it was an effective installation that was very transient.
I might, is it okay to share that in the Google Drive, the video?
Yeah, I'll send you the video, and we'll share that.
Yeah, it's good sometimes to see how these things take off. Any other questions or comments that have come through? Yeah, it's nice to see how some of you are thinking already, using the plates and the jars and the clouds. I think it really is. I mean, this is just a taster session. It's really kind of just to dive in and flick through and see what might inspire you. So one of the quick ways into that is to go to the DIY page, because it has all of the kind of activities, and just flicking through, you can see how that might be useful used in your setting. Have you got any tips for teachers on how to get started if you've never done anything like this before? I mean, do you remember first coming across this and thinking, okay, how might this work? Or if they were to get started on one activity, is there something that you think, yeah, that's maybe a good one to begin with, particularly at different times actually?
Yeah, I think if you, it's always good to start with something that excites you, something that you think you might like to do yourself. So that's always good because it translates well to students and other adults. It's also good to try out one of them if you can. If you've got some staff, if you can try out an activity with the staff, it's a really nice way of kind of seeing how it would work but it's a much smaller setting. There's not so many people. You don't feel as exposed, and then talking with them about how you might do it with the children. That's a really nice way into it. The JARS activity is really nice because you can tailor it quite a lot. I mean, I'm planning to do it with some of my children, but a jar doesn't have to be a teeny tiny jam jar. It could also be a very large cereal jar. It could be like an even bigger, like those big sweet jars that you used to be able to get in old sweet shops. They hang around schools quite a lot. You can use one of those, and then you can put in things that a child might like to choose that they missed from class, and those can be objects. It doesn't have to be words. A child could put in something that represents something. So for example, they might have missed their friends, so they might choose Lego people or something else to put in there. And then it's not quite, it also depersonalizes it. So if a child puts in an object, it means whatever it means to them. And then they can be happy to share it if they want to, and if they don't want to share it, that's just their way of being able to represent it. And maybe that's a way forward, a starting point that's not so threatening.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good tip actually, is to choose something that you want to do, because that enthusiasm, you know, will absolutely sort of travel in that space, and then trying it out amongst the staff group. I know, Alex, you've done that with yours, haven't you? You tried things out first.
Yeah, I think so. And I'm sure you saw in the video, but I started with objects actually, as a way in to start discussing. So, and you can pick objects that you think are suitable for the year group that you're managing, but just things like, I had a mask, a Barbie doll, a rainbow flag, an iPad, lots of things, a toy gun, and it just starts a conversation with the pupils that you've got in front of you about what those objects might mean in literal terms. But then what we tend to get them to do is group them, and they sometimes move towards gender stereotypes to start with. They put things that are typically girls, typically boys, but then that just starts a conversation about is that right that we do that, and then that's your way in really, and by doing that the pupils are leading it. So you're doing it in a way where you're only dealing on a level that they're ready for really, rather than you going in and managing that. They are, so that's a lovely way in too. But I love the start-stop plates, and I use that to finish my first session, as a way of just showing then the staff what the pupils want to stop and what the pupils want to start. And interestingly, when I then did it with my staff, the staff ones were very similar to the pupil ones.
Yeah,
they both wanted the same thing, which was interesting.
Really interesting. What about you, Mark? Any tips for teachers starting out? It's quite it can be quite an overwhelming resource to begin and to kind of engage with.
Yeah, I think the main thing that Agenda offers is a stage for pupils to voice their opinion. And what I found excites my pupils most is the idea that actually what they say is going to be listened to, and it's going to change something. So that runway of change, where they can put down everything that they want to change, and then so you can start with what jars you just to focus their minds. Then the runway of change is a way of them literally just giving you everything that they really want to sort of change about school life, about. society, about the world even, and we can then on a local level say, right then, what are the most important points, what keeps coming up, and the idea that you're going to take what they say to your leadership group and actually try and implement what they want implemented is a really powerful, or has been a really powerful tool for us in school, and it gets the pupils excited about making that change, I think. In terms of what we've done then is I've carried it on, and we've created assemblies through the 30-minute play resource, which is literally what things that have been said in your lessons. You can take statements that children have written on your stop-start plates, on your runways of change, and you can use them as lines to create a 10-minute, 15, 30-minute play for your assemblies, and that's quite a simple task to do, I suppose, if you're a drama teacher. But in terms of as a class assembly, if that's what you're doing, then that's a really effective way to get the message from one class to the whole school.
Yeah, I've also seen that your students teach other teachers and ask them to do the play, which is also absolutely fascinating, how teachers themselves create narratives around what young people might say. We've also trained sixth form students to deliver agenda to the younger students, and I think literally there we've got, you're just one step, you're always in the room, you're ensuring that safeguarding is absolutely paramount to anything that's being said. They are trained by the school counsellor in terms of safeguarding and things like that, but the sixth formers sit with groups, smaller groups, so it feels safer for them to speak to a near peer than maybe to speak to one teacher in front of the whole class. So they're speaking with their friendship group to another young person, who then brings their comments to me, and then I facilitate the rest of the discussion. Esther, have you got anything to add before we wrap up? There's another question here around Black Lives Matter, which I've just seen as well.
So just a lot, I mean, what Maureen said about starting with something that interests you, I think also just start with something you feel comfortable with. I'd say that really broadly, we've had teachers have taken two approaches. They've either sort of started with, let's look at views on RSE and let's map RSE, or they've said, that panics me and scares me because it's so big, and like a lot of you are saying in your comments, what if they say something that I can't deal with? So then they've decided, I'm going to pick a theme or a kind of like a thematic area of the curriculum and just explore that with children and people and see what happens. So a lot of people have chosen to start with relationships, or perhaps with bodies, or somewhere where they feel more safe, and then they've done kind of a lovely creative bit of work around relationships with a group of students, and that has really helped them build their confidence, and then they have felt confident to kind of broaden out and kind of look across the curriculum. So part of it is just kind of being really honest with yourself about what your own fears and anxieties are, and kind of starting from there. But I saw there was a few more comments about being sort of really unsure about, you know, could it be traumatizing for young people to ask them to kind of share, you know, what jars them, for example, about the pandemic? Because my starting point would always be the jars. I love the jars. I've used that in so many different contexts, in every context, and every single time it really facilitates people in contexts where people are really bad at talking about how they feel, or that doesn't often feel possible to do that. It really does facilitate kind of safe sharing. And what's so good about it is you can write, you know, and put your things in the jar, but then you choose whether people see what's in your jar. So it's really safe. And sometimes we find that people write really like kind of troubling things in their jar, but that never gets shared within the space, and that means that it's kind of really safe for that child or young person, that they can choose to write things, but they don't have to share it if it doesn't feel like a safe space. And so it's like what Alex was saying about the kind of sorting of objects into categories to allow children to set the agenda of what they want to bring into the room. So I think kind of working in this way is really a kind of really safe way to work, particularly when we've just been through something kind of as unusual and potentially traumatizing as the pandemic. and I suppose I would say the same for kind of Black Lives Matter. Like racism often comes out of people's creative audits. It's often something young people are really passionate.
Almost always, actually, I've noticed.
So again, and for some kind of young people, it might have been empowering. Some people might have been kind of traumatizing, but kind of either just using these methods and seeing if it comes up. But, you know, there's definitely, I would argue that it's a good time to kind of focus on the Black Lives Matter movements, use some of the agenda resources to explore how young people are feeling about, you know, everything that's been going on. I think these would again be a really safe way of allowing people to share what they want to share without kind of perhaps kind of stigmatizing or kind of like making the kind of people of color in the room feel like they have responsibility to talk, that everybody can kind of make things together and share what they feel comfortable with.
Yeah, I really agree with Esther. I mean, the Raging Rail fees is also really good for Black Lives Matter. And also looking at ableism and disableism, because there are lots of opportunities for photographing images and screenshotting images from protests, from other artists, from being able to look at what statues, all of those kinds of things can be done virtually. So it can then take their own screenshots. They can then create their own protest selfies, and being able to show solidarity with also with women's issues that have also come up, with child sex abuse that has also come up, and lots of issues that have come up in lockdown, child poverty. There's loads of stuff around Marcus Rashford, which might be really important to kids, and all of that stuff could be used. The Raging Rail fees could be used to support all of that stuff, I think.
And it's coming from them, so you're not introducing these topics, it's actually coming from young people themselves, and then you kind of can take that on. I think that's even more important now in terms of where young people and what they've been looking at and viewing and worrying about, and, you know, over the months they may not have been in school. Okay, so we've just got a couple of minutes, and so really this is kind of time to wrap up. I'm just going to share my screen. Just move my PowerPoint a minute. Oh, there we go. I'm going to play you out with the film, but I just want to thank you all. I know some of you get to leave early, but this is videoed, so you can pick this back up should you want to. Go to the slide here. There we go. So we do hope to run more of these webinars, but we'd really love your feedback on how a session like this works, what more you might need, what more support you might need, what more training you might need, and how we can do that in these sort of virtual spaces as well. So there's a survey link which we'd really love you to complete, so we can find out not just how you think the session's gone, but also how you're taking forward some of those ideas. And one of the ways in which Agenda works well is when you're sharing with other teachers what they're doing. As we've seen with just the teachers here bouncing ideas off each other, the chat box, again, working in a similar way. So the more you can share, the more you can make those connections, and then sort of further ideas get sparked, really, because Agenda is a resource to be used. As I said, it's not a prescriptive toolkit. These aren't lesson plans. It's actually just, it gives you ideas to really kind of platform young people's views, but we've noticed how the methods can do many more things than work with RSE issues. Thank you again. Thank you to all our teachers for taking part for a long day. Thanks for the NEU for inviting us again to come back and host the session. Do visit the website and do visit all those resources that we've kind of that we have there, and the Crush resource as well, which has more kind of stories of those creative audits, and share as much as you can, really, either using our Facebook page or our Twitter account. And yeah, it's really just about making those connections so that Agenda can do its work. We learn from you. That's how Agenda works. We learn from its practice and how it gets used. So I'm going to play you out with the film called This Is Me, All of Us. So you'll get to see now those kites in action. And this is a primary school project getting creative with addressing gender equality with rulers, plates, and kites.
you.